Hey everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at the Anidees Crystal XL case. It is rather big. That's what she said. So, normally I would start at the top and at the front, but this thing is ginormous. It's so big, it doesn't even fit on my twisty, tabley, thingamy, doofery, cakey, makery, belongs on a picnic bench thing. So, it's on the wonk a little bit, so it's just so you know, but I like to be able to spin my cases around when I do the reviews now. So, yeah, this one's a bit weird, I just can't balance it. So, it's 615 millimeters long, so that's its depth. Its width is 235, and its height from the bottom of the case upwards is 570, but then you've got another 25 millimeters for the actual feet as well. So you're looking at 590-ish in height, but there are vents in the top. So if you're measuring that and you're hoping to put it in underneath the shelf, the top does need to breathe as well. Now I am going to manhandle it and move it around so that you can see it better, put it down and everything like we normally do. But just so that you know, you don't have to have it with the RGB fans, and they are RGB, and I will show you this in a moment. But it's £220 with the fans. If you want it just as an empty case, it's £185. The only prices I've been given by Anidees at the moment are on Amazon, which I find kind of weird that there's not a dedicated e-tailer, retailer or anything backing it in the UK at the moment. So I'm not sure how I particularly feel about that. Maybe that's something Anidees need to get sorted out. But that's where they sent me the prices for anyway. But really, I suppose we should get down and dirty and start having a look at this behemoth. So you're going to laugh, and yes, I am handheld, but it's because even with the case lower down, I couldn't get a proper angle with the camera on my tripod. So we are a bit wobbly and moving around because, like I said, we're handheld, and I'm actually stood on the cabinet the case should be on. Anyway, power button has a metal ring in the middle, and it does light up. We can see that we've got microphone headphone ports. We've got the reset switch here, which you can also wire up for your hard drive activity light. It does flash quite a bit though. USB 3.1 and USB 2, and then you've excuse me. Then you've got a fan speed controller. Over here, you've got a stop, which is what S means. Then you've got low, and then you've got high. You do have to make sure that you connect it up to be able to use this though, and this is the only way that you can connect and control the internal fans. There's no way of connecting them to the board or anything unless you wire them all up separately, and they kind of link in with a controller for the RGB as well. Zooming out, there is a magnetic dust filter on the top, and you can see that there are an awful lot of fan mounts there, and that they're 140 and 120, but it does also mean that you can offset the your radiator mounts to get them away from the motherboard, because as you can see, get inside. Now when we do look inside, what I'll do is I'll also show you the height above the board and everything like that. But there is your dust filter. Now I will say that it does feel a bit cheap for a £200 case having a dust filter like this on it, but when it is on there, it cleans the lines up rather nice. It's not too noticeable. It's actually done, you know, relatively well. You know, once it's on there, it's on there. I just hit the power button, by the way, in case you're wondering why it's all gone quiet. Once it's on there, it's on there. So it's going to be up to you whether this is going to be something that's going to annoy you. One thing I would say about this is it's a dust filter at the end of the day, but it does clean lines up. And if you were going to put a water cooling radiator in the top, then I would suggest that you're going to want the airflow. I don't normally run top filters on my cases if I have them exhausting. But that's something you guys are going to have to make a decision for yourself. Now, while I've got the camera in my hand, I'm going to end up doing this all handheld, and you're going to go nuts. Ah! Right, so I step down. Hello, look, mega shiny. Anyway, the sides of the case, it does feel, if I'm honest, a bit fractal. It does feel like the R6 or something like that with those vents down the side. But, you know, it's going to be down to you whether that's what you think. At the end of the day, they're just vents at the front of the front panel. All the panels that are on it, all the glass panels are 5mm thick. They have a decent amount of tint to them as well, because, you know, you can't really see what's going on inside until it is lit up. Now, we haven't got any major lighting going on inside, but you can see that rear panel, that rear fan, sorry, the second it's turned on, it should come on again now. There we go. That rear fan, the second it's turned on, you can see it more. There's also a bit further down, you can see the light from the GPU showing up. If you were to put a lot of other lights in the case, then you'd pick out the light from the hardware a little bit more. But where there is light, it is quite visibly, yeah, all of that sort of stuff. But anyway, so we've done that bit. Yes, I know it's a weird angle, but I'm having to do it this way so there's not too many reflections, because it can be a bit off-putting. So the front panel pulls off nice and easily. You can see that we've got the tinted glass panel in the front, and then you've got your vents down the side for the airflow. Now obviously it's quite a bit of depth there. That's 30mm of depth, which is good for breathing cases. In the roof again, in the front again, we have another dust filter. If you've got it as intake, I would say that would be the good thing to keep that on as well. 420mm fans in the front. You can fit 140s as well. We have shuffled all the fans down because it came with them sat a lot more further up. When we talk about radiators and sizes in a moment, when we get on the other side, you'll understand why we kind of did it this way. But the long and short of it is you can get a 480 radiator in the front, as you can clearly see here. You can even get a 4x140 in the front if you want. But there's a lot of radiator option choices. You've also got pass-throughs here if you want to put fans on the outside. Problem is, if you put fans on the outside though, even though you do have the grommets here, it will mean that the fans are going to be sat partially in the front panel, which will mean that they're not going to be able to breathe as easily. I think if that was me and I was doing that, I would be getting handy with the Dremel and removing that plastic lip so that they could breathe a little better. But it is an option, and the fact that they do actually have cable routing holes to go through, definitely they deserve some brownie points for that. I would have assumed though, considering the size of this case specifically, you're going to keep them all on the inside. But it's always going to depend on the config, and options are never a bad thing. So you do get a bit of a dust filter in the front with the fans, although you don't necessarily have to have the fans, and the front panel can come off really easily, and it's actually a nice solid click when it goes back on as well. Those plastic clips don't feel particularly cheap. I think a lot of it is because of the weight of the glass in the front panel, but going on and off with it, there's a very nice clink and clunk. They've obviously used some decent quality plastic there. They've not cheaped out on it too much, and it does feel quite good. When we spin the case around, when I drag the power cable round with it, again, we're trying to work with angles here, but the power supply can go either way up in the bottom. Now this little vent here is to actually let airflow out, because there is a power supply cover. So remember this little vent here, because this is going to be paramount for what we're going to talk about in a bit. You do get, now you need to remember that the case is on the actual, it's lent down at the back, the feet are not on there, but there is a filter for your power supply. But the fact that we've got a filter in the bottom and this vent here and fans in the front, as I will show you, will mean that you can put the power supply either way around that you want. If you do put it the other way around, you just need to think that sometimes putting it the other way around can mean that you can shorten or lengthen the cables depending on where the 24 pin and the 8 pin are located. Now that can be really handy for those of you out there that put a little bit of thought into it when you're trying to cable manage. So sometimes you'll want to lose some cabling, flick the power supply around. Sometimes you'll need a little bit longer because it's a tool case. You need to make sure that the fan's pointing down. It doesn't matter which way round you put it. There isn't a way for the fans to work. Now the one thing that you do need to remember, because a lot of people get confused, they say about the power supply blowing in the case. It doesn't. The power supply always exhausts out the back, so it draws in from the inside. But any decent power supply nowadays the fans hardly spin, so you don't need to think about it stealing air from other components. Or at least I wouldn't overthink it anyway. One thing that we can also see, we've got a vertical GPU mount here, and there are an awful lot of expansion bays in the back. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Most motherboards have 7. So you've got the extra 2 from an XL motherboard, and then you've got another one at the bottom as well. So if you've got a big fat motherboard that you can put loads of graphics cards in, that's all going to be really handy. The other thing is the motherboard is actually slightly... and I'm going to pull you off and I'm going to bring you over on hand again. The motherboard is actually a little bit more recessed than we'd be used to, because there is extra room for the cabling and stuff. So where the motherboard does sit inboard a little bit more, you do have a few more gaps. You can actually get directly into the case there if you look carefully. Now that's nothing particularly exciting, and I'm not even sure that they've done it for a reason other than the actual way that the case is put together. But anyway, also in the back, it comes with a 120. If you get the RGB ones, you get 5 fans in total. You can also fit a 140 in the back, and you can see that we have the slots that we can move the case up and down as well. Now above the motherboard tray, the easiest way for me to be able to show you the height above the motherboard tray, as we know our motherboard tray is here, decent kind of line from the top of the fan, and then in the top you've got about 65 millimeters of room. Now you do need to keep in mind you can offset your radiator in the top, so that gives you a little bit more flexibility. But if we're going to go directly above the motherboard, 65 millimeters of room means 25 millimeter fan plus 40 millimeter spare, so a 40 millimeter maximum radiator depth. If you do go full offset, then you can obviously bring a bigger radiator into play, which might come in handy for you guys. But then that could also interfere if you're going to put a radiator in the front. And really the radiator in the front is probably going to be the easiest way for hosing and all that sort of stuff. And it's also going to block up where the power supply cover isn't there, and I will show you that in a minute. But keep all those kind of minimum points in mind, and then what we will do is we'll move on to the side of the case. Now there are extra, I would say extra thumb screws. Normally you have one on each corner. These have actually got another set, so rather than 4 thumb screws, it's actually got 8 thumb screws, because there's another one there, and there as well. So it's kind of like 2 diamonds. I'm not going to bore you with removing those though. Okay, so round to the backside of the case. Now straight away what I want to draw your attention to is there is actually hard drive bays in the bottom of the case, right at the very front. This is going to be the day where we're going to have loads of handheld stuff, because it's just going to be easier for me today. So we've got 6 extra hard drive bays in the front. Does limit room slightly for the power supply, and it does mean for a maximum length for the power supply you're looking at about 200 millimeters if you're actually going to get the cables in as well. But these bays are removable. You can just pop the screws off, and it's all kind of underneath that we can show, and you can actually take these out and just bolt hard drives straight down into the bottom, just singular ones if you want. And again, in a moment, when we get to the other side, something I want to draw your attention to is we do have cable mounting kind of grips here. But also, when I talk to you about stuff being removable, it's these little panels here. Now, I'll explain why I don't particularly like these when we get to the other side. And we do need to get to the other side for you to be able to understand why they're there. But you do also have these grommets. Now, these are covered by some pieces on the other side. Again, I'll explain to you when we get to the other side, but you'll understand why they're there a little bit more in a minute and how they're helping us with our cable routing. But if you do remove them, you also do need to remember that they are going to leave these holes in the other side. Now around the back we also do have, as you can see here, 3 solid state drive or 2.5 inch mounts, because you can obviously get up to 2 terabyte 2.5 inch mechanical drives now if you wanted to. Not that I think you should, but yes, so they are there. Now we've also got those, you can see you've got the little grommets here at the bottom of each one. There is another one underneath this one as well, so you could pass the cable straight through that side if you wanted. Again, wouldn't necessarily say that you should, but the other thing that these can be used for, not necessarily just for passing your SATA cables through, because as you'll see we went round that way with ours. Might be handy this way if you had a RAID card though, which again would make a lot more sense when we start to talk about the other parts. But you could also use these for passing other like USBs through and other kind of data kind of connection cables, and it does give you extra options along the bottom of the board. But the other thing that you do need to consider is these are right at the very bottom, and we know that this has extra PCI slots, so the actual motherboard's up here somewhere, which again I will show you when we're on the other side. Up on the top though, got 3 decent size pass-throughs, and then lots of the little latch downs that you can clip your cables up should you want to, which is all kind of nice. But the other thing that I would say is you can already see from the back side here that there are lots of little screw points for motherboard standoffs, but they are flipping everywhere. So the actual motherboard support for this case is immense. So you could literally server the bejesus out of this, which, yeah, we do just need to get round the other side, I suppose, now. But when we come down here, we can see the gap now. You can see the glass there. This is the amount of room that you've got for radiator space, but I did just want to show you from this side, because then you can see that you've got it goes straight into the hard drive bay, and it does line up with the end of the power supply cover. I'm not a fan of these gaps though, leading straight up into the rest of the case, because that's what it does. And again, I'll show you from the other side, but I was trying to give it to you from all angles. There's a lot of that's what she said today. I think I might just buy a gimbal so that I can do this easier. But essentially, don't forget the back of the case is hanging off. The feet aren't on there because it's not actually big enough for my spinny thingy. But we've taken the door off and you can see the gap that we have at the front. This gap with the fans in gives you a good 60-70 millimeters of room. So you could put a 60mm thick rad in the front, right the way up the top. Now the other thing that I was talking to you about was we dropped the fans all the way down, and that gives us a total amount of room between the top of the radiator, sorry, the top of the fan and the roof, 65 millimeters of room. But you need to also consider that you're going to have an end tank. You've got to get fans on. So I think you'd be lucky if you wanted to get a 480 in the roof as well. I think you'd be limited to a 30mm thick one if you wanted to run a 480 in the front as well. You might have to go 480 in one and 360 in the other just to be safe. But it's all going to come down to the end tanks, so the bit that goes above the radiator. Because if you had a 30mm thick end tank that come out here, your radiator that's in the roof is going to be incredibly close to that. So that's another reason why I've got you in my hands. But then we can also spin down here, and you can see that we have mounts here for pumps, and that's why they're there. You've also got a couple of grommets over here for yet another hard drive. If you wanted to, you could put a mechanical hard drive there. That's another reason why we have these grommets on this side. Pass-through grommet here for if you wanted to pass your PCI Express cables up through, but the reason why I'm doing this again is so that we can move really quickly. You know, there's a lot of difference between the grommet here and where my PCI Express cables would be. Now I would prefer to have them absolutely perfectly straight, or I'm just going to do what we normally do, and that's put them out the back. Now out the back, I did show you the grommets that they were down here. Now you have got, these are so that you can clip your graphics card in. R1 does just about almost nudge onto there, but kind of not quite. So we almost need to kind of like pull ours back a little bit. So even though we're running, this is an old 980 Ti matrix, but it's a long card. It comes right to the very end of an XL80X motherboard. The way that you can tell it's XL80X is the fact that you can see there's extra width from the final screw. So we've got an extra inch there, and the graphics card comes out that much. So that actually being a graphics card support is probably a little bit too far out for the majority of people that are going to use it. So for the bulk of you out there, it's not going to be a great deal of use. Now, I did say to you that there was motherboard mounts all over the place. There is an extraordinary amount of motherboard support in this. You could get twin socket server boards in here. If you did want to go bigger boards, these unscrew, come out, so that's not too much of a problem. I did also say about the grommets in the bottom being a fair amount of distance away from a normal depth board. So if you wanted to plug in your USBs from this grommet here, there's going to be a lot of USB visible. So it's not going to be the easiest case to keep particularly tidy. The other thing that I'm just looking around for, because I've realised I haven't picked them up, but it's these hard drive mounts. Now these screw in, where's the dual ones? That way round. So, and then you have the little pass-throughs, and I said to you before about something that would need to be removed. It's these. They push out, and I can't help but these little push-out points just make me instantly think of cheap cases, because you only ever normally see them on cheap cases. Now you get 8 of these, so you can put 8 hard drives in the front if you wanted. If you do put 8 hard drives in the front though, no front radiator. Well, unless you kind of do it around them. If you were going to put all 8 in, then they're just going to be getting cooled by the fans in the front. And you get these little mounts, and you screw your hard drives in, and bish bash bosh, and you've got, you know, ways, but you have to push these out to be able to put your SATA power and your data through. But like I said, I really don't like these. But you need to think, if we've got 8 of these this side, you've got another 6 hard drive bays just down here as well. So you can put an awful lot of hard drives in this case. And then it also kind of starts to kind of make sense with the fact that we can get all of the extra motherboards in, and all that extra width and all that sort of stuff. This power supply cover is removable if you don't like it, or it's getting in the way. Maybe for modding and stuff. It does also mean that if you wanted to put more hard drives in, you would have that ability, because normally with server cases and stuff, unless you're going to be using it as a render farm, don't necessarily have a lot going on in this section. But it's only if you're going to absolutely chock-a-block it out for like rendering videos and stuff that then might become an issue. You can't buy anything from Anidees to add these in. It's just in case you're one of those guys. It's a bit handy, but it's kind of starting to appear like it's a bit of a kind of like a hands-on case anyway. Also in the back you can see where I said to you about the vertical GPU support. It's only a single one. It does have vents here though, because you always get the end of the graphics card exhausting heat out a bit. So you do get the vents for that there as well. So there's a fair amount going on, and I'm apologising now again for all the seasickness. So I've pulled the front off the case just so that I can show you the remote, because we got the RGB version. Now this is a wireless RGB remote. There's no way to control this with software. The only way you can control these lights is with this. There's no way to control it through a motherboard or anything like that either. So it's a bit limited in that sense. But for those of you that don't like RGB, you can turn the lights off, which will please you greatly. But we do have an auto button in the middle, and when you press the auto button, the lights can do whatever they want, and they do that kind of cycling sort of thing. But then either side you have a mode button as well. Now I'm just going to press mode minus, and we'll go through some of the options. That's actually blue and red. The camera's just having a bit of a spaz because of the poor light, and it's trying to brighten everything up. Then if I just keep pressing, I will say that I was quite sad that there is no white and red fading option like this. Anyway, we could be here all day going through all of the colours. The one thing I would say about the fans though is you can see the LEDs through it. They needed more of a deeper frost to be able to diffuse the light a little bit more. But then you can do that, but then you can also, as we were putting them on white, you can turn the brightness down as well and make them duller if you want. I'll turn them all the way back up again, and then you do have quick buttons for R. That is a really nice red, by the way, not the orange that it looks that I'm seeing on the camera, and then green, and then blue. But back to white, back to the start. Okie dokie then. So I have mixed feelings about the XL. So it's big. You can get a lot of water cooling in it. That's fairly apparent. Positive point, yes, because there are ways that you could get a pair of 480s in there. I think for the most of you, if you were worried, I'd go with a 480 in the front and then maybe a 360 in the roof, or the opposite way around, depending on sort of like reservoir heights and stuff that you're going to be looking to be running. So that's, you know, a fairly positive point. Other positive point, lot of glass on it. Big glass panels. That does make it very heavy though. You might find when it's fully built that you're going to struggle to move it around on your own. I certainly struggled getting it on the dolly and everything on my own. Hard drives could easily be turned into an epic home server case, and by epic I mean huge motherboards, twin CPUs, plenty of airflow, lots of hard drives, although I really don't like the way that the front hard drives go in it. And that is kind of where the kind of tone starts to change. So I don't particularly like the way that the front hard drives go in it, and the way that you have to push those little parts out makes it feel cheap. And then the other thing is the whole case feels like it's a cheap design with an awful lot of very heavy glass bolted to it. It's a very simplistic design. There are no frills. The frilliest part about it is you've got a big right angled hard drive, power supply cover down the bottom, and they didn't even really line up the PCI Express pass-through where the bulk of PCI Express graphics cards are going to have the cable, so that your cables are always going to be on an angle, and they did that in favour of 2 water cooling pump mounts instead. Now I would have thought that 1 water cooling pump mount at the end of the power supply cover would have been enough, and maybe a second grommet would have been a better idea there. I know why they've not done it though. It's because there is a hard drive mount underneath it. It still confused me a little bit though. So yeah, so like for example, things that make it feel cheap, those pass-throughs for the hard drives, the mesh for the roof. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because, you know, we've seen these magnetic mesh cases before, but, you know, add-ons before, but it's a £220 case, especially if you go with the RGB. The RGB, again, can't be connected to a motherboard, can't be controlled with anything other than this. There's no way, even though you've got all these nice movements that you can have cycling through, there's no way that you can actually pick the 2 colours that you want. So there are a few limiting factors with it. The fans, they feel all right. Do you know what I mean? You can connect them to the fan speed thing at the front, but I would kind of assume that for the bulk of people out there, you know, if you were going to build yourself a funky looking server, then you might keep them because you can, you know, turn it on and off and that sort of stuff. But I think if anyone was going to put water in here or spend any kind of money trying to fill this case up, these fans are probably going to end up going in favour of something. If you're in the lighting kind of sense, you're going to end up favouring these in with something that you can actually end up controlling the light on a little bit better. So there are good and bad points for the case. I think it's going to depend on how much you want the size, because if you want the size, you're going to end up making the most of the shortfallings. So for argument's sake, those covers at the front, if you're going to go water cooling, what I will say is by the time you've smashed a big thick radiator in the front, you're not really going to be able to see them. So then it's not necessarily too much of a problem. The GPU support's pretty useless, if I'm honest. They're pretty much grommet covers, because it's only going to be archaic, massively long graphics cards that are ever really going to be able to stretch out that far to be able to make the most of them. So it's a shame, again, that those grommet covers, because that's essentially what I think they are, couldn't be moved. Because the other thing is, if you haven't got an E80X motherboard like we've got in this one, and this is even quite an old one, I think it's the Rampage 4 Black Edition that's in there, if you're going to end up with big gaps at the side of the board anyway. So, you know, there's lots of little things that I'm not particularly that enthused about, like the big grommets down the bottom. So for argument's sake, where the solid state drives are, you'd have to run a 90 degree at the bottom of your solid state drive to be able to pass it through this way. But then you're going to end up with all the cables in here. There's lots of little things about it which they look like they're kind of good ideas, but then when you actually come down to the process of trying to use them, it just makes things a little bit more difficult. Now, I am being ultimately very picky, but that's because at the end of the day, I get to see a lot of these things. So if you don't understand what I'm saying, then maybe it's because you're not that fussed about cables looking tidy, big strips of cables hanging out around the front of your case. And if that's not going to bother you, then completely ignore me. But if you get what I'm saying and you're like, oh yeah, I don't want a big stretch of cable there, and I don't want my SATA cables going that way, and you know, I did like the idea of GPU support, but hang on a minute, it's not like actually anywhere near anything that I can use, then that's the type of time that you're then either going to have to go, it's not the case for me, or if you're a modder, how can I make it the case for me? Because it does have a lot of options there if you want to get creative. Like I said, the front bits that I hate will get covered up with a radiator, or you could get yourself some plastic card or a bit of carbon fibre, or a strip of aluminium, depending on what side of the pond that you're from, paint it up, get it laser cut. There's loads of things. You can put plexi there. You can get plexi and satin and matte, so you can make a bit of plexi to go over it. So there are loads of things that you could do to make it better. It just depends whether you want to spend £220 on a case that you'll know you're going to have to make better though. Let me know your thoughts underneath. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on the thread on the OC3D forums, and I will post a link to the thread on the OC3D forums as well. I'm also going to make sure that Anidees get to see it as well, because I do see a lot of positives in this, but I do think it's going to take someone that either doesn't particularly care what their rig looks like on the inside, or someone that is willing to put some effort in to make it right, because I do think this is the sort of case that you have to make your own. Now, I'm genuinely not sure about what award I would give it, because having to make it your own, there being shortfallings, that sort of thing, to me screams enthusiast award. I mean, that was the sort of case that we were giving to the hex gears, the sort of award that we were giving to the hex gears and the parvums, the ones that are not necessarily very mainstream, but they have a cult sort of following. I think Anidees have got a little bit further to go with this one yet, but the only way that they're ever really going to get there is if they start listening to people and maybe working on things a little bit more, or getting people to show them what might be possible. So, as I've said, join the discussion on the OC3D forums, but that's my thoughts. I'd love to know yours.